A white father demanded this black woman give up her seat for his daughter. But the flight attendant's quiet response left the entire cabin stunned. Tanya Whitfield hated flying on Fridays. Too many people in a hurry. Too many tired faces, and never enough overhead space. But she had no choice this time. Her client insisted on an in-person pitch in Dallas. And the last-minute rescheduling meant she'd be flying coach back to Atlanta. Still, she told herself, a window or aisle seat was all she needed. Somewhere to zone out and decompress. After a mentally draining day, she walked through Terminal C at Dallas Love Field, with her laptop bag slung across one shoulder. Her boarding pass already pulled up on her phone. Gate C17, Group 4. She found a corner seat near the window and waited. No music, no scrolling. Just quiet. Her mind was already shifting toward the weekend. Laundry, groceries. A long nap, something simple. When boarding started, she lined up and stepped forward. As her group was called, row 18. Seat C, aisle, perfect. She tucked her bag under the seat in front of her, pulled her phone out, and leaned back. For the first time that day, she exhaled. She was halfway through reading an email when she noticed someone standing in front of her. She looked up, a tall white man in his 40s. Buzz-cut, navy t-shirt tucked into cargo pants. And a little girl with blonde pigtails, clutching a stuffed animal. Tanya blinked, waiting for him to speak. "You're in our seat," the man said flatly. She tilted her head slightly. "This is 18C, right?" "Yeah," he said, glancing at his ticket. "But my daughter needs to sit there." Tanya frowned. "Sorry, but this is my assigned seat." The man looked down at the girl, then back at Tanya. His tone shifted, slightly sharper. "I need you to move. My daughter's sensitive. She doesn't do well sitting next to strangers like you." The pause. The word choice. The way he looked at her, not her clothes. Not her seat, but her. Tanya felt the weight of what he meant. She wasn't new to these games. It wasn't about his daughter. It was about control, about her being a black woman in a seat he decided she didn't deserve. She stayed calm. "There are empty seats toward the back. Maybe the flight attendants can help you find something." His jaw twitched. "I paid for this seat. I don't want her sitting in the back." "She's not sitting in the back," Tanya replied, voice even. "She can sit right here in the middle. You're welcome to take the window." "I'm not asking again," he said louder. This time raising his eyebrows, as if that would push her into silence. A couple across the aisle turned to look. The woman leaned toward her husband, whispering. Tanya felt the shift in the air. That quiet shift. When people recognize something's wrong, but don't know how to step in. Some averted their eyes. A teenager 2 rows up peeked over her seat. But Tanya didn't move. "I'm not switching seats because you feel uncomfortable," she said. "Your discomfort isn't my responsibility." The man took a step closer. The little girl's grip on her stuffed animal tightened. She looked like she wanted to disappear. Tanya didn't break eye contact, not once. Her hands were steady. She kept her voice measured. "You're making a scene in front of your daughter. Is that really what you want her to remember from this flight?" That was when she heard footsteps from behind. Measured, confident. A voice followed, soft but clear. "Is there a problem here?" But what happened next wasn't something Tanya, or anyone around her, saw coming. The voice belonged to a flight attendant. Mid-50s, low bun. calm eyes. Her name tag read Marisol Vega. She stopped just beside Tanya's row and scanned the scene. Like someone who'd dealt with this kind of tension before. Not surprised. Just observant. "I'm sorry," she said with a polite smile. "Can someone explain what's going on here?" Before Tanya could open her mouth, the man jumped in. "This woman is refusing to move. So my daughter can sit next to someone she's comfortable with. I paid for these seats. We always get this row." Marisol tilted her head. Then looked at Tanya. "Ma'am. Is this your assigned seat?" Tanya nodded and held out her boarding pass. "Yes. 18C. Marisol scanned it quickly and nodded. "Thank you," the man interrupted again. "I'm just asking her to show some decency. My daughter doesn't need to sit next to this kind of situation." That time, he didn't even try to be subtle. Tanya felt her throat tighten. But she held it in. Her fingers gripped the edge of her phone. She knew what was happening. And she knew how quickly things could spiral. If she responded with anything less than absolute composure. Marisol didn't flinch. She looked at the man squarely. "Sir. I understand you want your daughter to be comfortable. But seat 18C was assigned to this passenger. If you have a request, I'd be happy to check if there are available seats for you and your daughter elsewhere." "I shouldn't have to move," he snapped. "Why is it always people like her who get protected, while the rest of us get pushed aside?" The little girl looked down at her shoes. Her face flushed red. She hadn't said a word since they boarded. Tanya spoke carefully. "Your daughter can still sit next to you. I'm not stopping that. But I won't give up my seat just because you don't like who I am." More heads turned now. The man's volume had drawn attention. Some passengers stared outright. A few held their phones low. Not filming, but ready. Marisol exhaled slowly and nodded once. "Sir, I'm going to ask you again. Do you want me to check for another arrangement? Or are you choosing to escalate this?" He didn't answer. His face had turned red. His lips pressed into a hard line. "Because if you're choosing to cause a disruption," she added, "I'll need to inform the captain." That got through. He backed up half a step. "Fine," he muttered. "But she should be ashamed." Marisol's expression didn't change. "The only thing shameful here is teaching your child to fear people who've done nothing wrong." The man said nothing. Instead, he sat in the window seat, pulling his daughter into the middle. She looked even smaller now. Her backpack hugged to her chest. Tanya didn't say anything else. She stayed focused on her phone, trying to stay grounded. Her heart was pounding now. But she refused to show it. Marisol gave her a gentle nod. "Let me know if you need anything, Miss Whitfield." Then she turned to continue helping other passengers find their seats. Tanya took a slow breath. The weight of the moment still sat in her chest. But she refused to carry his shame, that wasn't hers. She glanced sideways. The girl didn't look at her. Tanya didn't blame her. Kids absorb everything. Especially silence. But while the man might have backed down, the tension in the cabin was only just starting to build. As the rest of the passengers settled into their seats, the quiet around Tanya felt louder than ever. She could sense it, the held breaths, the quick glances, the awkward silence pressing in from all sides. The people sitting nearby pretended to look out the windows or focus on their tray tables. But she felt their eyes flicker toward her. Not openly, just long enough to register. That they were part of something uncomfortable. And maybe too afraid or unsure to say anything. The man beside her, Douglas Hanley, had sunk into his seat. His posture was stiff. One hand gripping the armrest, while the other pulled out his phone. The little girl kept her gaze on the seat in front of her, swinging her legs in slow motion, like she wanted to be anywhere else. Tanya scrolled aimlessly on her own screen, reading the same paragraph 3 times. Her mind couldn't focus. The flight hadn't even taken off yet. And already she felt exhausted in a new way. Not the kind of exhaustion that sleep fixes, but the kind that sneaks in when you're made to feel out of place. On purpose. No one said anything to her. Not right away. But eventually, the woman across the aisle. Mid-60s, shoulder-length auburn hair. Navy blazer. Leaned in a little and spoke just above a whisper. I saw what happened. That was something. Tanya looked up. The woman gave her a faint smile. One that carried both awkwardness and warmth. I'm sorry he treated you that way, she added. Some people carry their ignorance like luggage. They refuse to check. Tanya let out the smallest breath of relief. Thanks. The woman didn't try to say more, and that was fine. It was enough to be acknowledged. But not everyone on the flight was so quiet. 2 rows ahead. A man in a baseball cap muttered to the guy next to him. Loud enough for Tanya to catch pieces. People always looking to start something. Can't even sit down without drama. Tanya kept her face blank. She'd heard worse. She'd heard better, followed by worse. And it always came from someone who thought neutrality was virtue. As if doing nothing was somehow the wiser choice. Meanwhile, the flight attendant, Marisol, moved up and down the aisle, checking seatbelts, helping an elderly couple stow their carry-ons, calmly giving directions like nothing had happened. But Tanya noticed how Marisol's eyes lingered a moment longer on her row. Every time she passed. Douglas didn't say a word. Not to his daughter, not to Tanya. Just sat there, arms crossed. Eyes closed, like he was the one being burdened. When the safety demonstration began, Tanya did her best to zone in, though her mind was still replaying the confrontation. Not just what had happened, but what it meant. How many people had sat in seats like this before? Silently shrinking under someone else's entitlement? And how many had given in just to avoid the scene? The plane began to taxi. Outside the window, runways blurred. Past the moment of takeoff came that familiar push against the seat. The brief weightlessness. But Tanya barely registered it. A few minutes later, the seatbelt sign dinged off. And things started to settle. Flight attendants began their beverage rounds. Passengers opened books, connected headphones, or pulled blankets over their laps. Then came something unexpected. The same woman across the aisle stood up, turned to Marisol as she came by and said, "Would it be all right if I switch with this young lady here? She shouldn't have to sit next to him." Marisol paused. The request took a second to sink in. Tanya blinked in surprise. "Of course," Marisol said gently. "Let me help you move your things." Tanya looked up, startled. "You really don't have to." "I want to," the woman said. "Call it a seat upgrade." As she slid into the aisle seat next to Tanya, Marisol leaned down to the little girl in the middle. "Would you like a ginger ale or an apple juice?" The girl whispered, "Ginger ale." Marisol winked. "Coming right up." But as the woman buckled in beside Tanya, the next move would come from someone no one expected. And it would shift the energy in the cabin yet again. Marisol returned with the ginger ale and a small napkin, shaped like a square of care. She handed it to the little girl, with a warmth that softened everything for a moment. "There you go, sweetie," she said, her voice almost a whisper. The girl nodded faintly, and took the drink with both hands, not meeting anyone's eyes. She didn't speak. But she didn't need to. Her silence had more clarity than anything her father had said. Douglas kept staring ahead. His jaw was tight again, and, though he hadn't said anything since the confrontation, his silence now had a different edge. He'd lost control of the moment. Lost the audience he thought he could sway with volume. As Marisol moved back toward the front of the plane, she paused. She turned slightly, as if debating something. Then, she stepped into the intercom station near the galley, and pressed the button. "Good afternoon, everyone. This is Marisol, your lead flight attendant. On behalf of the crew, we want to thank you for flying with us today. We understand that travel can be stressful, especially on a full flight. But we also want to remind you that kindness and respect go a long way at 30,000 feet. We are a diverse airline, and we value all of our passengers equally. Thank you for doing your part to help make this flight a safe and welcoming space for everyone on board." The message was short, straight. No names. No incident mentioned directly. But no one had any doubt what it was about. Some people nodded. One man in the back gave a soft clap that no one joined. But it didn't matter. The point had landed. Douglas shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable now. Tanya didn't say anything, but she glanced toward Marisol, at the front of the plane, offering a quiet look of gratitude. The woman now seated beside her, her name was Janice, as Tanya later learned, leaned over and said, "That's what you call grace under pressure." Tanya smiled. She didn't have to say anything. "True," Janice replied, "but sometimes the right people know when silence is part of the problem." Tanya had always been the kind of person who didn't seek attention. She preferred handling things privately, keeping her reactions measured. But this wasn't something she could shrink from, not when a child had been used as a shield for ignorance, not when someone had decided her presence was a problem to solve. About 30 minutes into the flight, Marisol returned to her row, crouched down beside Tanya's seat, and kept her voice low. "I wanted to say something to you, not as a crew member, but just as a woman who's seen this too many times." Tanya paused her movie and turned toward her. "You didn't flinch," Marisol said, "and you shouldn't have to. I've seen passengers give up their seats in situations like this, not because they were wrong, but because they were tired. And I get it. But you stayed seated. That matters." Tanya blinked. The words hit harder than she expected. "Thank you," she said softly. Marisol gave a light nod, a small smile. "We're supposed to keep things neutral. But sometimes neutrality just keeps things broken." Then she stood, adjusted her vest, and returned to the front. For the first time in the entire flight, Tanya felt her shoulders relax. The cabin was quiet now, but not cold. There was a different kind of awareness in the air. Passengers weren't whispering anymore. No one needed to. The silence was no longer about avoiding tension. It was about understanding who had carried it, and who had challenged it. But the flight wasn't over yet, and Douglas still had one more surprise to face, this time from someone wearing a badge. An hour into the flight, things felt calmer. The hum of conversations returned in scattered pockets. Some passengers dozed off. Others worked on laptops or watched whatever movies the airline still offered for free. But row 18 remained quietly alert, like a page that hadn't fully turned. Douglas Hanley hadn't said another word. He sat stiff, arms crossed over his chest, eyes fixed on the seat back in front of him, as if staring hard enough might erase the whole situation. His daughter had finished her ginger ale and now rested her head against the armrest between them, eyes half closed, thumb grazing the ear of her stuffed rabbit. Janice sat comfortably in the aisle seat next to Tanya, flipping through a magazine. Every now and then she'd make a passing comment about something on the page or mention a show she'd seen. Tanya appreciated the distraction. It made the remaining flight feel more human, less like a courtroom. About 15 minutes before descent, the cabin lights dimmed slightly, and the captain came over the intercom to announce the initial descent into Hartsfield, Jackson. Passengers stirred. Seat backs went upright. Trays clicked into place. Then, just as the cabin crew began moving up the aisle for the final checks, a man in plain clothes stepped forward from the front. Tall. Clean-cut. Wearing khakis and a black pullover. Around his neck hung a thin leather badge wallet. His presence was quiet but unmistakably official. He stopped next to row 18 and leaned slightly toward Douglas. "Sir," he said, low and measured. "May I speak with you for a moment when we land?" "I'll make it quick." Douglas blinked. "Why?" "I'm with airport operations," the man replied. "The flight crew filed a report about a possible disruption at boarding." "Just a quick debrief, sir." Douglas looked around, as if hoping someone would step in on his behalf. That same confidence he had earlier, when he barked at Tanya, now visibly cracked. He didn't answer. He just nodded once, barely. Tanya didn't say a word, but her heart thudded again, not out of fear this time, but out of something she hadn't let herself feel yet, vindication. Not because someone else was in trouble, but because for once, someone had actually stepped up before brushing it aside. Janice raised an eyebrow. "Looks like Karma flies coach too." Tanya half smiled. The plane touched down smoothly. As it rolled toward the gate, Tanya took another glance out the window. Atlanta's skyline faded behind the terminal roofs, the familiar flicker of jet bridges waiting to connect. Once the seatbelt sign went off, passengers stood quickly, grabbing bags, jackets, earbuds. Tanya stayed seated for a moment. So did Douglas. The man with the badge hadn't gone far. He stood just outside the cockpit now, quietly waiting, arms crossed. Marisol walked down the aisle slowly, thanking passengers, directing them with practiced ease. When she reached Tanya, she paused. "Take your time," she said. "I'll wait right here." Tanya nodded and stood, reaching for her bag. Janice touched her arm lightly. "Whatever you're carrying, don't carry it alone," she said. "I won't," Tanya replied. "Not anymore." Douglas stood as well, keeping his eyes forward. He didn't try to apologize, didn't look at Tanya, just held his daughter's backpack and waited for her to step ahead of him. But even his silence now felt different, stripped of entitlement, heavy with consequence. As passengers filed out, a few glanced at Tanya. Not out of curiosity this time, but recognition. One man gave her a small thumbs up. Another woman gently said, "Glad you didn't move." No one tried to stop. They just let their support land quietly. But Tanya still had one more moment ahead, one that would stay with her longer than anything that happened on that plane. Tanya stepped out into the jet bridge and felt the difference in air, warmer, slightly stale, but oddly grounding. The hallway stretched forward in that familiar narrow way. She followed behind Janice, with Douglas and his daughter walking several paces behind. At the end of the jet bridge stood the plainclothes agent, now joined by a uniformed airport security officer. Neither looked aggressive or impatient, just ready. As Tanya passed, the agent nodded slightly at her. Not performative, just acknowledgement. Douglas was stopped politely, not in front of everyone, but just off to the side near the glass wall. Tanya didn't hear what was said. She didn't need to. The officer leaned in to speak quietly, and Douglas responded with a few terse words. His daughter stood beside him, her stuffed rabbit dangling from her fingers. Marisol appeared again, clipboard in hand, walking with another flight attendant toward the gate desk. Before disappearing, she turned briefly and made eye contact with Tanya. A small wave, a nod. Then she was gone. Tanya walked slowly into the terminal, the rhythm of her steps finally catching up with her breath. The gate was calm. People were texting loved ones, checking for connecting flights, looking for bathrooms. Normal life resumed, as if none of what happened had registered beyond the walls of that plane. Janice caught up with her near the baggage claim escalator. "Want company while you wait?" Tanya shook her head gently. "I'm good. Really? Thank you." Janice smiled. "Then I'll say this and leave you be, that man may not have heard you, but everyone else on that plane did. People remember things like this. You taught a lot more than you think." Tanya didn't say anything right away. She just nodded once, deeply. They hugged briefly. Janice walked off, rolling her carry-on, disappearing into the steady stream of travelers. Tanya sat on a bench near the carousel. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mum. "You home yet? Call me when you land." She stared at it for a moment, then locked the screen. She watched the baggage carousel begin its slow churn. Suitcases flopped onto the belt one by one, thudding gently into each other. But Tanya wasn't really watching the bags. Her mind was tracing the whole flight again, not the drama, but the choices. How easy it would have been to give up that seat, to say whatever and move, just to avoid being bothered. She'd done it before, countless times in hotel lobbies, conference rooms, elevators. All those little moments when it felt easier to shrink. But not this time. And it wasn't because she wanted a scene. It wasn't about making someone else feel small. It was about not abandoning herself, not shrinking just to keep someone else comfortable. She saw Douglas exit the terminal with his daughter. He didn't look around. He didn't glance back. The child turned once, just for a second, and made fleeting eye contact with Tanya. Then they were gone. Tanya exhaled. A man in a denim jacket sat down beside her with a tired sigh. They didn't speak, just shared the bench like people do in airports, all on their own journeys, all carrying something. Her suitcase finally slid into view. She stood, walked to the belt, grabbed the handle, and pulled it up. But what stayed with her wasn't the weight of her luggage. It was the weight she didn't carry anymore. The Uber ride home was quiet. Tanya sat in the back seat, window halfway down. Letting the cool Atlanta breeze slide across her cheek. Street lights passed in slow rhythm, painting the inside of the car in flashes of gold and shadow. The driver, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s, made no small talk. And Tanya was grateful for the silence. Her head was still too full. Her apartment sat on a tree-lined street in East Point. Not far from a corner diner she loved. As she rolled her suitcase up the stairs and unlocked her door, the stillness of home met her like a deep breath. She hadn't realized she'd been holding all day. She set her bag down gently and kicked off her shoes. The living room light bathed the space in soft yellow. On the wall hung framed photos. Her college graduation, her niece's birthday. The trip to Savannah last summer. Normal things. Personal things. Proof of who she was. Outside the context of someone else's opinion. She walked to the kitchen. Filled a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to reduce her. But this time, something in her had refused to bend. She kept thinking about the little girl too. So young, already caught in someone else's narrative. Tanya wondered if she'd remember that flight when she was older. If she'd remember how her father tried to shame a stranger. Or if maybe she'd remember the woman who didn't flinch. Who didn't fold. She also kept thinking about Marisol. About her measured voice on the intercom. Her decision to speak up without escalating. Her choice to take a stand in a way that felt calm but firm. Marisol hadn't needed to say what she did. But she had. And that meant everything. Tanya finally sat down on the couch and grabbed her phone. She opened a blank note and typed out a sentence just for herself. Sometimes the seat you don't give up teaches people more than silence ever will. She didn't post it anywhere. Not yet. It wasn't for applause. It was just something she needed to write. Something to remind herself. That choosing to stay seated. Not physically, but emotionally. Was a kind of power too. She opened her text thread with her mom. Just landed, I'm okay, call you tomorrow, love you. Then she put her phone face down. And let her body finally relax. Tanya didn't feel heroic. She didn't feel proud or brave. She felt grounded. And maybe that was enough. Not every moment needs to be loud to matter. And maybe that's the lesson. That dignity doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes. It's just a woman in an aisle seat. Refusing to move. For someone who thought he could take up more space than he earned. As the night settled in, Tanya looked around her apartment. Small but full of light, full of her. The world outside hadn't changed. But something inside her had. And she wasn't giving that seat up either. If you've ever been in a moment like Tanya's. When standing your ground felt hard but you knew you had to. Know that you weren't alone. Stories like this matter. They remind us that dignity doesn't ask for permission. It just is. If this story resonated with you, subscribe for more. We share moments that speak to the power of everyday courage. The kind you don't always see. But never forget. But what stayed with her wasn't the weight of her luggage. It was the weight she didn't carry anymore. The Uber ride home was quiet. Tanya sat in the back seat, window halfway down. Letting the cool Atlanta breeze slide across her cheek. Street lights passed in slow rhythm. Painting the inside of the car in flashes of gold and shadow. The driver, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s, made no small talk. And Tanya was grateful for the silence. Her head was still too full. Her apartment sat on a tree-lined street in East Point. Not far from a corner diner she loved. As she rolled her suitcase up the stairs and unlocked her door. The stillness of home met her like a deep breath. She hadn't realized she'd been holding all day. She set her bag down gently and kicked off her shoes. The living room light bathed the space in soft yellow. On the wall hung framed photos. Her college graduation, her niece's birthday. The trip to Savannah last summer. Normal things. Personal things. Proof of who she was. Outside the context of someone else's opinion. She walked to the kitchen. Filled a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to reduce her. But this time, something in her had refused to bend. She kept thinking about the little girl too. So young, already caught in someone else's narrative. Tanya wondered if she'd remember that flight when she was older. If she'd remember how her father tried to shame a stranger. Or if maybe she'd remember the woman who didn't flinch. Who didn't fold. She also kept thinking about Marisol. About her measured voice on the intercom. Her decision to speak up without escalating. Her choice to take a stand in a way that felt calm but firm. Marisol hadn't needed to say what she did. But she had. And that meant everything. Tanya finally sat down on the couch and grabbed her phone. She opened a blank note and typed out a sentence just for herself. Sometimes the seat you don't give up teaches people more than silence ever will. She didn't post it anywhere. Not yet. It wasn't for applause. It was just something she needed to write. Something to remind herself. That choosing to stay seated, not physically, but emotionally, was a kind of power too. She opened her text thread with her mom. Just landed, I'm okay, call you tomorrow, love you. Then she put her phone face down. And let her body finally relax. Tanya didn't feel heroic. She didn't feel proud or brave. She felt grounded. And maybe that was enough. Not every moment needs to be loud to matter. And maybe that's the lesson. That dignity doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it's just a woman in an aisle seat, refusing to move. For someone who thought he could take up more space than he earned. As the night settled in, Tanya looked around her apartment. Small but full of light, full of her. The world outside hadn't changed. But something inside her had. And she wasn't giving that seat up either. If you've ever been in a moment like Tanya's, when standing your ground felt hard but you knew you had to, know that you weren't alone. Stories like this matter. They remind us that dignity doesn't ask for permission. It just is. If this story resonated with you, subscribe for more. We share moments that speak to the power of everyday courage. The kind you don't always see, but never forget.